Hi guys, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to strip and check and reassemble a Hotend from a Creality printer. In this case it's Creality Ender 2. This is a brand new build and this is an addition to the complete build that I'm doing of the Ender 2. And this particular Hotend is exactly the same as the one that you'll find on the Ender 2, the Ender 3, the Ender 5, the CR10, the CR20 and onwards. The only thing missing from this one is the cooling fan at the side, which is literally just a cooling fan, bolts to the side with a little plastic scoop and then additional wires that come up this wrap here. Otherwise, exactly the same. It's a metal box with a cooling fan for the heat break for the finned heat sink at the top there, and at the bottom we have a brass nozzle, a heater block with a cartridge and a thermistor, the throat which is a stainless steel tube, and then the heat sink which is this finned aluminium part at the top. Your PTFE tube then pushes down, right down through the stainless steel throat and meets up with the nozzle, and then you have these quick release Bowden tube couplers that you push down and pull the tube out of, and then over here you've got a similar one for the extruder end. And this is something I recommend everybody does on a brand new build of a printer, because when I built my Ender 3 I had a problem with this in that I assumed all was well, built everything, lined it all up, leveled it all out, pushed the filament through, started printing, and it was great for about 4 or 5 prints, and then I started getting under extrusion issues. And I tried changing the nozzle, I tried all kinds of things, and I didn't solve it until I stripped everything down and I found out that I'd got a build up and a blockage of PLA in the stainless steel throat. And it's because when they assemble these, they tighten up the nozzle fully into the Hotend, into the heat block, and then you tighten up this connector, push the PTFE tube down until it butts up against the brass nozzle, and then the problem is there's a little bit of give in it. So what happened is this wiggled itself up in use as it does when you push a cable, the Bowden cable. This is where the name comes from. So when you push a cable, or in this case the plastic, the PLA, through here and down through here, it causes this to flex, and it allowed it to push up enough that a little bit of PLA built up in the stainless steel throat. So what I'm going to do is take it all apart, show you how it all disassembles, which is going to be handy to know, and then reassemble it and show you how to reassemble it in such a manner that you guarantee that the PTFE tube will butt up firmly and solidly to the nozzle. So the first thing we need to do is to loosen these 2 screws here. Use the short end of your Allen wrench, not the ball end, because these can and will strip easily. So make sure that it's firmly seated and then slacken them off. They might be a little bit tight. These aren't actually too bad, but they can be quite tight. And then undo these screws. As this comes away, you'll see that it's connected by the wires to the fan and the wires to this down here. I'm going to take a knife and I'm just going to slice the Kapton tape that's holding this cotton wrap onto the heat block, and we're going to unwrap that. I'm actually going to replace this because I've got some thicker cotton wrap and Kapton tape. However, if you're going to reuse this, there's another reason we're taking this off as well, which I'll explain in a moment. If you're going to reuse this, then I would recommend that if you don't have any Kapton tape, just take a little bit of parcel tape or something, a thin strip, and stick it over the Kapton tape, wrap it back round and then just stick it together. That will hold it adequately. And the other option, of course, is if you have a silicone sock or you buy a silicone sock, then you can use that, and that just sits over the heat block down here. So the parts as they are, you've got the nozzle underneath, the brass nozzle, you've got the heat block. These thick wires go into this tube here, which is a heater cartridge, which goes right the way through, and that heats it up. And then at the side here, you've got a crosshead screw with 2 smaller wires going to it, and that is your thermistor that tells it the temperature. So if you hook this over your Y-axis bar, just to keep it out of the way for the moment, you'll need to take your smallest Allen wrench supplied, and underneath here is a tiny grub screw. So if you loosen that, again with the short end, and use the ball end to unscrew and nip things up, but never to loosen, and then basically wiggle this out. You can give it a bit of a push with that as well. And then we're going to take the screwdriver. Ideally we could do with a crosshead screwdriver, but this will do the job. It will fit in. And we're going to unscrew the little crosshead screw at the side that the thermistor is fastened to. Be very careful with this because the thermistor wires are very thin and very fragile, and it's easy to damage them, and you don't want to do that. But the beauty of doing this now is that you won't have to do this when it's all gobbed up and gummed up with PLA if you have a bit of a disastrophe and it all oozes out everywhere and gums all this up. And that's where you would have to heat everything up and gently pry it all apart and ease it all apart. So down here, let's see if I can focus on this for you. We have the heater cartridge and the thermistor, which is a tiny little bulb with 2 wires going to it, and this fits into a little hole, and this loop that you can see formed on there is where the crosshead screw sits and holds it in place in the thermistor. When you retighten this, don't tighten it too tight. It only needs to be tight enough literally to hold it in place in the little hole. Too tight and you might crush the wires and break one of the wires, and then you will get an error which is commonly referred to as a min temp error. You'll see that mentioned on the groups and forums. We're going to undo these 2 Allen bolts here and here, and this is what holds the hot end onto the plate. So as before, slacken them off with this end to make sure that you don't strip the heads, like so. And then you can spin them out with the ball end of the wrench. If the fit of your supplied wrench feels anything like slightly dubious, don't go ahead, don't force it, don't risk it. Just buy yourself a set of decent hex wrenches. They're not expensive and it's well worth having some. I'm using the supplied ones just to show that you can, but a decent set of hex wrenches will look something like that, and a half decent set will cost you somewhere between, say, sort of £7 and £10 UK, but they will last a long time if you look after them. So that's your hot end in its entirety, in its full beauty. And oddly, in this case, there is actually a little gap under there, which is something that I am going to talk about shortly. There are also these 2 screws that go up beside the throat that you can see. Now, there's some debate as to whether these are supposed to be there, and they are allegedly used for alignment in the factory and should actually be removed before the unit is packaged. And it's one of those things where it's a case of do they cause heat creep? Well, yes, obviously they do, because it's 2 stainless steel bolts which are going up into the heatsink. So yes, it is going to draw heat away from the hot end up into the heatsink. Is it enough to cause a problem? Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not with PLA. But in the grand scheme of things, why risk it? You know, take them out while you've got the thing apart, and then rewrap everything, and then you know you're good to go, you know you're okay. So at this point we're going to scoot down to the bench and we're going to start taking this apart. So down here on the bench we've got the complete hot end assembly. If I turn it over to this side, you can see here the tube that the heater cartridge slots into and goes through, and here we have the screw thread that this large headed screw with a built-on washer fits onto. This is what crimps the thermistor on, and the thermistor itself slots into this tiny hole underneath, and that's what feeds the heat information back to your board. And then, as you can see, down here is the nozzle. This is the heat block, so this heats up. heats up the nozzle which is connected to it, and then your stainless steel through it, because steel is a worse conductor of heat, and then an aluminium heat sink because aluminium is a better conductor of heat, and then your PTFE tube goes right the way down through this stainless steel tube and butts against the nozzle, so that the only bit getting hot is the nozzle in theory, and your cooling fan is cooling this, which is drawing heat away, so it's not heating up the tube and melting filament up inside here. And that's how they work. And what we're going to do first of all is take the appropriately sized Allen key, and we're going to undo these two bolts for these screws that connect the heat block to the heat sink. So just loosen those off as before with the appropriate end, and then spin them out. You can throw those in your spares box. You won't need them for refitting because we won't be using them, as they serve no purpose other than lining up the two components. That in itself isn't a problem, because when you realign them for refitting, all you have to do is lay both of them flat on a table or a work surface of some description. So the Bowden tube connector pushes, and then the tube in theory pops out, but this one seems to have jammed in. Now, removing a nozzle, you're going to need a couple of tools that you don't have in the kit. You have a small spanner which, if I show you, sort of fits the nozzle, like so. It's a 6mm, but you can see it fits, but there's a bit of slop there. And in all honesty, while I'm all for using the supplied tools to show that you can, this is crap. Just really don't bother with it. Get yourself a decent 6mm socket spanner and wrench, or a 6mm open-ended and ring spanner, and use that instead. You will also need something that can clamp and hold the heat block. So I use this big chunky adjustable wrench because I have it handy, but anything that will clamp and hold it firmly will do the job nicely. And then you can use that to loosen your nozzle. Once it's loosened, you can spin it out by hand like so, and that is your heater nozzle. Now you can see hopefully there, if I angle this up to the camera, hopefully you can see down there the PTFE tube protruding, and that's come right the way down through here and meets up with the nozzle at the back here, and that actually looks fairly well fitted compared to some. And you can see now that that's removed, I can actually press that and push the tube through and pull it back out, but it tends to, the crimp inside the tube tends to bite into the PTFE tube and lock it in place, and this is where the problems occur if you remove and replace the nozzle, because it won't actually push or pull, it just kind of gets jammed in place. While I've got this apart, I'm actually going to go ahead and replace this and the one at the Bowden connector end, the one at the extruder end, because I just happen to have a couple of better quality replacements. You can tell the quality difference when you push the connector, because there's more of a click, more of a definite lock to them, and it's a stronger spring. You can actually feel it. If you look down inside, I don't know how well this will show, if at all, on here, but down inside there are metal teeth which open up as you press that in and come back out as you release it, that grip into the PTFE tube, and it's the same on both of those, and they're just better made than these. You can actually just feel the difference when you push them. So using your double-ended spanner, the large end fits that, and just loosen it off and spin it out. Keep these as a spare if you are going to change them, because they're okay. They're not, it's not that they're not up to the job or anything. They're just not the best quality, so if you probably will end up replacing them at some point, but if you have some decent spares, it's worth doing straight away, I think. And that pretty much is the only thing that is, I would consider, important to do on a new build of an ender, that and the fan cover for the Ender 3. So slacken off this grub screw here, which is the same size as the grub screw underneath, and then you can slide that entire thing out. Unless you absolutely have to, don't remove the throat, this stainless steel bit, from the hot end, because that's actually held in with thread lock. Well, the one on my Ender 3 definitely was anyway, and after I struggled to remove it and marred up this surface a bit and had to sand it back down because I was gripping it, it was, oh, you know, that's just made a liar of me, because this one is, or is it? Do you know, I'm not 100% sure. I think it kind of is, but it's certainly not as solid. Well, would you believe that? That's just unscrewed by hand. But yeah, you can actually see there that there's some gunk in there, and that's a bit of thread lock. It's not a problem if it comes out, so don't worry about that if it's loose like this one was. I just didn't expect that one to budge, because the one in my Ender 3 really put up a fight. Something that you'll see as well, worth mentioning while this is out, if you have an incident where your nozzle slams into the bed, this can actually crack. It can fracture and break across here, and that's not uncommon, because stainless steel, while it's very hard, is quite brittle, because it's everything else on here will flex to a degree. This won't. So if this has an impact, it can actually crack across there, and you will need new parts or a new hot end, depending on what's easiest and cheapest for you to get. So that's kind of handy actually, because that's the whole thing disassembled. So we've got the heater block there, which is threaded at both sides for the nozzle and for the throat, which is this stainless steel tube, and then the heat sink, which is this bit here. When this tube goes into the heat sink, this is why, another reason these screws are really not needed, not necessary at all. That hits a point where it cannot physically go any further. It has a step inside, so as you push that in, it will stop at a point where you need to tighten it up. So there's no need for those screws other than purely to line it up, which you can do by just laying it flat on the table like so. And once everything's tightened up, it's not going to move, or not going to move noticeably particularly. So that's your hot end assembled, and it's worth having a quick check of the state of your PTFE tube, and if it's looking a little bit ropey, either trim some off if you've got enough spare, or use a bit of fresh PTFE tube. This stuff is very, very cheap, and if you're in any doubt whatsoever, just replace it. It's the easiest thing to do. What you can also do is just spin it around and use the other end if you're in any doubt at all. I'm going to reassemble it just now using the stock setup, and then I'm going to show you a modified one with some files that are available on Thingiverse. And that particular one, you will need to print a couple of items to do. So obviously, if this is your first printer, you will need to get it up and running to print these, and you need to print this, which is a guide to cut your PTFE tube square, and this, which is a spacer which fits into the top of your hot end assembly. And this is something I'm going to try on this one, and it effectively makes this a lined throat, so that you don't have to struggle getting the PTFE down there, because it's held in place by this spacer instead. So in theory, it should work well, should work very, very well indeed. But what we're going to do is screw this back in here, and then put that in there, holding that so it's flat on the table like so. I'm going to take the Allen key and just nip that up, and then while it's still flat, take the other end and tighten it. So that's now held in place. As you can see, it's still turning because the thread's now turning in the block, but that's not a problem, don't worry about that just now. I'm going to take this and screw it into the top of the heatsink, and then you're going to unscrew it one full turn so it sticks out like so. Then I'm going to screw in your nozzle, and wind that in all the way until it butts up, and then you're going to unscrew your nozzle one full turn, like so. So you've got a gap there. At this point, take your PTFE tube and push that fully in until it butts up against your nozzle. Turn your nozzle in half a turn so you've got a little bit of a gap, and then tighten up the top fully so that that's absolutely rock solid tight. And that's what I recommend you do every time you change the nozzle. Obviously you don't have to take the entire unit off. You can do this while it's on the printer, but what you do is you hold this block with your wrench or what have you. You use your ring spanner or whatever's suitable to tighten this up, or to untighten this. Then you loosen this off, put everything back together, leaving a bit of a gap, push the tube down and then tighten that up tight, and then heat the nozzle, heat the hot end up to temperature, so you can do this while the cartridge is in and everything. Then set it to heat PLA or something similar, or just heat the nozzle. Heat it up to the printing temperature that you're going to use, and then nip this up just to make sure it's firmly bedded against the PTFE tube, and that's not going anywhere. That's literally buttered right the way up against the nozzle. There are no gaps whatsoever, and you should still, as you can hopefully see there, have a little bit of a gap there. This should be tight down. So the important thing is to make sure this is unscrewed a full turn, this is unscrewed a full turn. Push the PTFE tube in until it butts up solid. Then tighten this one down fully, tighten this half a turn, heat it up, and then just tighten this a little bit more until it feels good and tight. And you can see there that unless you physically start twisting that, that's not going to move anywhere. And that will be absolutely solid and you'll not have any problems. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and strip this and use this to make a custom PTFE sleeve using this spare bit of PTFE tube I have, so that I'm going to have a PTFE sleeved stainless steel throat. We're going to put this spacer aside and take this tube. It's important that the ends are cut square because that end is the one that mates with the back of the nozzle, and that has to be flush. The other one at the Bowden, at the extruder end, isn't so crucial. This one is very, very important. It can't leave a gap. So what I'm going to do is push that in right up to the end of that so it butts up like so, and then taking a very, very sharp scalpel blade or razor blade. A Stanley blade or something will be too thick, so you need a scalpel blade, a razor blade, X-Acto blade, something like that. And I'm just going to, making sure that's fully buttered up to there, and I'm going to slice straight down that slot. And that should, according to the details, give me a perfectly sized piece of Teflon tube to fit in that throat, which will then tighten down perfectly. So that will slide straight through there, and if I actually push that through, you can see it will come straight out of the bottom with the nozzle out. So I'm going to put that in there. What we then do is we put the spacer in the top like so, and then we'll line this up properly, screw this in here like so, and then in theory what this should actually do is do away with the need to loosen this and tighten this at every fitting. However, that's not butting up properly yet, so I think I might have to screw that in a little further. That's better, yeah, that's better. So I've just not got the heat block screwed in quite far enough. So So that's promising, and it leaves a little gap, which I like to see there, so you know that there's a bit of wiggle room. If it butts right up to the heat block, then you don't know for certain that it's fully butted up to the tube. So I like it to have a little bit of a gap. Then the same thing applies. Heat it up to printing temperature, take your wrench, and then just nip that up. Now you're not hanging on this thing, you're not cranking it round, you're just nipping it up, so it just needs to be tight at full printing working temperature. So that's the Luke Hatfield mod, if it's Luke Hatfield, apologies if not, but I will put a link to that in the details below. And then this just fastens back onto the mounting plate, so we're going to go back up there and put it all back together. Something to bear in mind when you refit this, there is a little bit of wiggle room on this, and it allows, let's get the right, there we go, it allows you to wiggle this side to side a little, and it's not uncommon for people to show pictures of their hot end and it's slightly wonky one way or the other. So when you remount it, make sure that you get this level. If need be, just drop it down to your build plate and make sure that you wiggle it until it's actually, the nozzle is going straight down, it's level effectively. I've loosely fitted the fan cover with just one bolt which is nipped in a couple of threads, so that the fan is working and cooling the heatsink there. And then once this is up to temperature, I will actually put that into cool down mode, but while it's still nice and hot, and pop the fan cover off. Using the big wrench, I will hold the heat block, and then using this, I will just nip up the nozzle. So what I'm going to do is use the wrench to just grip this block front and back so that you're not at risk of pinching the wires. And I'm just going to take this socket here and literally just nip that up just a little bit. And that means it's fully buttered up to the PTFE tube and good to go.